It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Good afternoon, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I am your humble host, Stephen Moore, economist. I've been doing the show now for 3 or 4 years. It has always been a great privilege to be in front of this microphone. We are now on for 2 hours of fresh programming. If you listen to just about any other program on the radio on a Saturday afternoon, you're going to hear a bunch of boring infomercials. We are always coming up with great guests. We have a fantastic show for you this afternoon. I will not be taking your calls this week because we have a full show, but I have to tell you, we've got an amazing show lined up. We have Arthur Laffer, the great economist, who I co-wrote a new book on called The Trump Economic Miracle that I want everyone to get. We also have the great Steve Forbes, who is one of the great economists and financial minds in our country, coming on. We have Bob Nardelli. Bob Nardelli was the CEO of Chrysler. He was the CEO of Home Depot. He was one of the top corporate managers at General Electric, knows more about business than anybody I know. Bob Nardelli is an expert, so we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with the economy, what are business conditions like right now, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, should be fantastic. And then I'm really proud that I have Judy Shelton coming on. And Judy Shelton is truly an extraordinary economist. She should be running the Federal Reserve Board, and she may run the Federal Reserve Board when Trump becomes president. And I do believe he will be elected president in, I don't know, it's about 26, 28 days. I can't keep quite track. And so Judy is going to talk about what the Fed has been doing, what's happening with our monetary policy, why is inflation creeping back? And it is. So we've got a huge show for you today. I'm very proud of the fact that we're able to get the A-list of great people to come on this show. And I say it every week, I'm not the best radio talk show host, but I get some of the best guests that you're going to be able to listen to and learn how to make more money. Now, let me start with what's going on in the economy right now and some of my great concerns. And I'm going to start with this. I do believe that we do have a continuing problem with inflation. I do believe that prices are continuing to rise. I'm looking at what's happening to the prices of gas. I'm looking at the prices of food. I'm looking at the prices, things like lead and steel and the inputs and everything that we produce. And ever since the Fed cut the interest rates with their so-called jumbo rate cut, that was about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, prices are starting to creep up again. I'm not trying to be the bearer of bad news here, but I've got to tell you, these trends are not favorable. Now, I know some of you say, wait a minute, we just got this report the other day that's showing inflation has come down. That report is based on the data from about 4 weeks ago. What we're looking at now is a very different situation. You can look day after day after day what is happening in real time at a price of wheat and cotton and copper and steel. Those prices are rising. And I think it's because the Fed acted prematurely. They come up with a jumbo rate cut, 40, 50 days before the election. I think it was a totally political decision by the Fed. Shame on them. And they have unleashed, at least for now, another round of Biden inflation. They just have. And it's going to show up pretty soon. As close as this week, you're going to start to feel the effect of higher prices. And unfortunately, the big increase in the prices will happen right after the election. They timed it perfectly, didn't they? So I'm here to tell you that this is going to be a real problem for family finances. I want to tell you too, I did an analysis this week in our hotline, our Unleash Prosperity hotline. By the way, I hope everyone is getting the hotline. I mean, there's no reason not to be getting it because its cost is free. It costs you nothing. I'm not selling you folks anything. I don't sell things on this show. I'm trying to encourage you to sign up for the Unleash Prosperity hotline. Just go to unleashprosperity.com, sign up. It is free. We will send it to you 5 mornings a week. You can read it in 5 or 6 minutes every morning, a little bullet points. You'll have some fun with it. We're a little snarky. We always put some cartoons in there and other things to kind of make fun of what's going on politically, because there's so much to make fun of. But we also have some very serious information about there that keeps you up to date with what's happening with stocks, with financial markets, the economy, the trends. And some of the trends are good and some of the trends are bad right now. But I've got to tell you, over the last 4 years, things have not been healthy for the economy. The other thing that we learned this week was that the budget deficit for fiscal year 2024 came in at roughly $2 trillion. We don't know the exact number. It's interesting because I announced last week that it was $2.3 trillion increase. That was the increase in the national debt. In other words, the national debt went from somewhere like $35 trillion to $37.3 trillion. And if my math is right, that's a $2.3 trillion increase in the debt, which would mean we ran a deficit of $2.3 trillion. But then the government numbers came in on the deficit, and they're saying it was only $1.8 trillion. I'm saying, how can one number be off by $500 billion off of the other one? And I haven't gotten to the bottom of that. I don't understand how the national debt can go up in 1 year by $2.3 trillion, but they're saying the deficit went up by $1.8 trillion. By the way, either one is a horrific number, right? It's disgusting. It's outrageous what's happening to the finances of our country. But 2.3 trillion is a lot higher than 1.8 trillion. So somebody, maybe if you all know, contact me, let me know why it is there's a $500 billion difference in there. Are they playing games with the numbers? They played games with the numbers on the census. And this has been a bugaboo of mine for the last few years for those who are regular listeners to the show. So what happened was that because they miscounted the number of people, partly because of COVID, they gave the blue states like New York, and I think Massachusetts was another one, and there was one other blue state, I think it might have been Illinois. They gave those states an additional electoral vote, and they took 2 deserved seats away from Texas and one from Florida. I think that's the way it worked out. But what I'm trying to tell you is the red states should have 3 more electoral votes, and the blue states should have 3 fewer. Why does that matter? Well, just pay attention to the polls, because the polls are showing us that right now it's very close. Both candidates are very close to the 270 votes they need to win the election in terms of the electoral votes. So it could be within 1 or 2 or 3 votes that the next, in terms of the electoral count, that the next president needs. And it could be, if Kamala Harris wins by 1 or 2 or 3 points, it's because they miscounted. And I think that it was intentional. I think that they screwed up. They gave too many votes to the blue states. It's another example why you can't always trust the numbers. And you can't trust the numbers on the jobs, right? Because they had to revise almost 1 million jobs down that they had previously announced. Gee, funny how that happens. They didn't underestimate the jobs. They overestimated the jobs, so they could always have these monthly, you notice how they have these monthly jobs report headlines. Oh, the economy created 400,000 jobs or 300,000 jobs. The Biden economy is working. Oops, no. We overcounted those by 1 million jobs. There are 1 million fewer working Americans than we thought we had. Do you think that that's an accident? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not going to accuse people of wrongdoing. I'm here to tell you, you can't always trust the numbers. Okay, I've got so much on my plate I want to bring up, and I what I do throughout the week is keep my talking points of things I want to tell my audience based on the events of the week. So I'm just going to go through some of these really quickly in the opening round of this show. The first one I want to mention is hurricanes. We've had now in the last few weeks 2 horrible hurricanes that have smashed into Florida and North Carolina and Arkansas and Georgia. And the Southeast has really been hit hard with these. And my heart goes out to people who lost their homes, lost their properties. I think that several hundred people have lost their lives. I've lost count of what the latest count is, but these are deadly storms. They do billions, tens of billions of dollars of property damage. They've left people homeless. They have knocked out power lines. By the way, it's unbelievable to me. We're about almost 2.5 weeks after the first hurricane hit, and as of Friday, still you had hundreds of thousands of people whose electricity has not been restored. I've got to say this. I think that the Biden-Harris response to the hurricanes has been feeble and incompetent. And this is what happens when you elect people who don't know how to run anything, people who don't have any business experience or management experience. You get these kinds of responses that have been absolutely horrible. There's a cartoon we had on the hotline the other day of two people standing on the top of their roof, surrounded by floodwater as it keeps rising, and a FEMA helicopter comes by and it lands on their roof. And instead of, them climbing on the helicopter, 8 illegal immigrants get off the helicopter. And it really is a nice summary of what's going wrong with America today. By the way, you saw that the illegal immigrants are getting more benefits than the people who've lost their homes and lost their property and life savings because of these storms. $750. $750 is what is going to, make these people whole. Come on. And then we're passing out free rent, free food, free this, free that for the illegal immigrants. And I'm for immigration. I think immigration is great. They got to come in legally. They got to come in the right way. And we've got to make sure that people aren't coming in that are causing problems in our country. The reason I bring up the hurricanes, though, is, the climate change people are out there. Oh my God, we had these hurricanes because of the climate change. And I'm not saying the climate change isn't, there has been a warming over the last 50 years, no question. There has been a slight warming. What I'm saying is, Lord knows why that's happening. The idea that somehow this is man-made and that man-made decisions are having a bigger impact on the weather of the globe than Mother Nature. I mean, that is an audacious thing to say, or even more audacious to think that government politicians are going to change the weather of the planet and stop hurricanes. These people believe in big government so much, they think that big government is going to stop hurricanes and tornadoes and floods and droughts and whatever it is, for deep freezes. Remember, it was only 45, 50 years ago they said we were freezing, we're going to all freeze to death, and now we're all going to die from climate change because the temperature is rising. But the point is that if you look over the last 150 years, and we have really good data for the last 50 years and not so much great data before, say, 1950, but we do know when hurricanes hit. And we do know that if you look at the last, certainly over the last 50 years, there's just a slight, tiny upward tick in the number of hurricanes per year. But if you go back to like 1850, they had like some huge hurricanes back then. And that was before any of the carbon was introduced into the atmosphere. So what caused those hurricanes? Can somebody tell me? Well, I don't know. Was it man-made that we had these hurricanes? So that is simply a fabrication of the evidence. Hurricanes have been happening for as long as the planet has existed. I hate to tell you this, but politicians are not going to stop hurricanes, okay? And we've got to be better. By the way, fewer people die from weather events today than any time in history as a percentage of the world population. So the way to deal with weather events is to use technology and economic growth and so on. Great show this afternoon, folks. Stay with us. This is the More Money Show on WABC, and I'll be right back.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. We are on WABC Talk Radio. Thank you to John Catsimatidis, who has created a powerhouse radio station, and we also have affiliates throughout the country, and I know a lot of people listening online, so thank you so much. On a beautiful Saturday afternoon to be joining us for the show, my next guest is Judy Shelton, who knows more about money than just about anybody that I could possibly have on the show. Judy is a senior fellow at the Independence Institute. She's on the Unleash Prosperity Economic Advisory Board, and we love her advice. She has a great new book out that is soaring on Amazon Economics. It's called Good as Gold, and that's what we have to do with our money, right, Judy? We have to make it as good as gold. And she also served as a board member of the European. What was that? European Bank? What was that, Judy?
Yeah, it was for the Trump administration. My title was U.S. Executive Director to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The U.S.
Wow.
puts up most of the biggest part of the capital for that multilateral development bank.
Got it.
And
where was that local? Where were you? Were you in Paris or where were you?
That's in London.
In London. Okay, got it. Well, it is wonderful to have you on the show, and it is very timely to have you on the show because we want to talk about what's happening with inflation, what's happening with money, what's happening with gold prices. First of all, let's just start with your book and what motivated you to write this book, and what do you mean by good as gold?
I probably was motivated after the nomination process, because I felt that there was sort of this smug disdain for any mention of gold, when in fact, in the times in history when the U.S. has been part of the international gold standard, or we were the anchor in providing a gold convertible dollar for the Bretton Woods system. You hear people talk with nostalgia about a rules-based system, but the fundamental rule was that you could convert the dollar, $35 for an ounce of gold. And I think it brought discipline. We had excellent economic growth for 25 years under that system. And so I think it's worthwhile to point out to people, as I try to do in the book, that when you have a dollar that is as good as gold, it not only gives you a level international monetary playing field, which then supports the logic of free trade,
right?
But it also gives people a sense that their dollar is solid. They won't have it debased 2% every year or more and lose purchasing power. And I think that's important.
It sure is. And I want to make sure that my listeners know and understand that you, like me, we were both appointed or nominated by Donald Trump to be on the Federal Reserve Board. And I didn't make it because I've got a lot of skeletons in my closet, but you didn't make it because the heresy in Washington that you would stand for something as important as making sure the dollar is as good as gold. I bet 90% of our listeners would agree with you on this. It seems like it's common sense. And by the way, can I ask you, when you say good as gold, are you for a gold standard, or what exactly do you mean?
What I have in mind is a very specific proposal, but the aim would be to set up a beachhead to put the country back on a fiscal sustainable path, because you really can't have sound money without sound finances. So what I propose is something that I think is actually doable. The United States is the world's largest holder of gold reserves. We have 261 million ounces, and we are carrying them at a book value of $42 per ounce.
By the way, is that gold? Is that gold at Fort Knox, or where do they put it? Where is it stored?
It is mostly at Fort Knox, also at the New York Fed, and a little at the U.S. Mint. But our holdings are substantial. And what I'm suggesting is that gold, it's the family jewels. But I think the United States should consider our current fiscal and monetary situation a family emergency. And I would propose that we issue a long-term bond, even as long as a 50-year bond.
Yes.
If we issue it in 2026 on July 4th, it could mature on our 300th anniversary.
I love that.
Signing of, I love idea. It too, because, I think you're setting up a marker that we are going to be standing tall in 50 years, and we're going to get our fiscal house in order, and we're going to move toward a sound dollar and quit debasing our currency every year.
I love that idea. And, I too am in favor of a price rule. Now, you're talking about gold. I might expand that a little bit to commodities generally, but I think this idea, Judy, that we're making this up as we go along at the Fed is destabilizing and just creates a lot of problems. But, I wanted to tell you something and get your reaction to this, because I remember back in around mid-2018, I can't remember the exact year, but when Trump was president, sometime midway through his presidency, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal, and I suggested that because interest rates were so low back then, that we lock those low interest rates in, and we should consider issuing 50-year bonds, maybe 75-year bonds, maybe 100-year bonds, and that we could lock in rates as low as 3 or 4%, and that this would save the Treasury a lot of money. Now, when I told Donald Trump that idea, by the way, he was intrigued by it, and he said this sounded good to him, but a lot of the people at the Treasury Department shot down the idea. But I feel like we probably should have done that because, of course, interest rates have risen just as I had predicted in the Wall Street Journal. And now we're going to probably pay hundreds of billions of dollars more interest costs. So, but I don't think it's too late to do this. And I just wanted your reaction to that.
Well, I think that idea actually did get a lot of play at Treasury because I was still involved with Treasury. They oversaw my position even in London.
Okay.
And during the transition, I was assigned to Treasury as the lead advisor on international issues.
Okay.
And we looked seriously at issuing a 50-year bond to see if there could be a market. And your idea of locking in the low rates is an excellent one because, as you just said, here's the irony. When rates were near zero, it became an excuse for the government to overborrow.
Right.
We can run up the deficit financing because we can. It's so cheap. But now nothing changed. We're still running up the deficit financing, even as interest rates have been at a 22-year high. The problem is that you would think a rational business person would say, let's refinance the debt so that we can maximize the value of that capital while minimizing the expenses. But the government never thinks in terms of minimizing the expenses. They just tack on this now outrageous price of financing the debt, which now exceeds what we pay for defense. And they just tack it on as a larger future deficit. So we don't have the kind of logic and business discipline that your idea made sense, but not for government.
So why do you think it is that when you and I had suggested a price rule, that there'd be rules that everyone knows what they are, and that you're sort of taking some authority away from the Fed, the so-called geniuses at the Fed, and everyone knows what the rules are, and you abide by those, except for maybe during a war or a pandemic or some kind of extreme situation. My good friend Jeff Yass, who's with Susquehanna Capital, one of the smartest guys I know, thinks that if you do that, you take a lot of uncertainty out of the economy if everyone knows what these rules are. And, there's whole industries that have developed just to guess what the Fed is going to do.
Well, exactly. And the price rule idea, I even think using these bonds that I'm proposing, I call them Treasury trust bonds, could become part of a price rule, a threshold, that if the rate of return on those was at a certain gap from what the Treasury has to pay to get people to purchase normal, traditional Treasury debt, that would be such a strong signal to the Fed that people don't believe in the credit worthiness of government debt, and they would be forced to increase. But as you say, there is this safeguarding of total discretion. And Janet Yellen in particular, testifying before Congress, resisted it and said, we don't want any mechanical rule to hold back our hands. And this is despite the uncertainty. But to me, the even greater irony is the same people who are so concerned about maintaining the independence of the Fed so it can't be politically compromised are the ones most resistant to rules. Yes. If there were rules, then none of it would be subject to being influenced by politics or anything else. And yet they don't want that. They want to leave that discretion in that group, which doesn't have a lot of intellectual diversity. And that group makes it clear they're relying on data, but the data is proving to be dubious. So there's no virtue in the way that they are carrying out monetary policy.
I'm talking to Judy Shelton, who's one of the smartest people on this planet on monetary policy. She should be the next Fed chairman if Donald Trump is elected, because she knows so much about how money works and how to keep our dollar stable in value so we're not eroding it away. And by the way, Judy, I think when you erode away the value of the dollar, I view that as a tax on the American people.
Oh, it's not. Yes, it is fully a tax. It is expropriation of property. Right. When people earn their money, and if they wanted to put it under a mattress, they should feel free to do so. Right. It's meant to be a store of value. Yeah. But let's say they do that for 10 years, and even if the Fed pats itself on the back and says, "Oh, we hit our 2% rate," when they're ready to use that money, 20% of its purchasing power has been taken away.
Been lost.
Without due process. And so, I think people should demand sound money.
Yeah. Can I hold you over for one more quick session? I know I promised I'd only take about 10, 12 minutes, but this is a fascinating conversation, and I want to ask you about inflation. Do you have a few minutes?
I'd love it, yes.
Okay, we'll take one quick break. This is WABC Talk Radio. This is Steve Moore, the host of The More Money Show, and we will be right back in 60 seconds.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I'm having a fascinating conversation with the great Judy Shelton, who is one of the smartest people in America on how we should manage our money, how much money should be printed, what the Federal Reserve Board should be doing. She is somebody I think that Donald Trump would highly consider to be the next Federal Reserve Board chairman. So welcome back, Judy. I wanted to switch our conversation to the issue of inflation, the I word. And I'm here to say that I think we have not conquered inflation. And I know a lot of people think, oh, inflation's over. I think the Fed seems to think so. I was disturbed by the 50 basis point reduction in rates, what they called the jumbo cut. And I wanted your reaction to what they did.
I sent a letter to the editor that the Wall Street Journal printed up saying that I thought it made no sense within the Fed's own parameters to cut 50 basis points. They went 8 straight meetings holding rates at the highest level in 22 years, and then it looks like they panicked. When they cut, they thought maybe they missed the boat in July, so they go 50 basis points just before an election. And now, outrageous. In retrospect, it looks outrageous. Political. It looked overtly political, and it looked silly. It looked silly when the job numbers came in strong, and now when we see the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, going up this week, it looks like they made the very mistake. They kept saying, whatever we do, we're not going to do that. We're not going to cave so soon by their own criteria and invite inflation to come back.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I guess great minds think alike, because I've been saying that for the last couple of weeks on this show, that I do think it was political. I mean, how else can you explain why you would cut rates by that amount of money right in the shadow of a coming election? And by the way, you know this, Judy, but I want to remind this to our listeners, that the next Fed meeting, do you know when that is, Judy?
Yes, it'll be November 7th. And the interesting thing is,
right after
it would normally be November 6th, because they meet on Tuesday and then they announce on Wednesday. That week, they're delaying it by one day for the very reason that it would look political for them to be discussing interest rate policy. And yet I couldn't believe, it bothered me to hear Chair Powell doing this borderline panic massive cut. 50% is a huge cut. And then say, and the labor market's fine and the economy's fine, because the only reasonable reason to do it, according to the Fed's criteria, would have been if they were extremely concerned about labor. So all of the things he said at the press conference sounded like, well, everything's absolutely fine. And why did we take an extremely aggressive move? It's illogical.
I couldn't agree more, and I think I think that the Fed has gotten some egg in their face for doing that, and I think it's especially ironic because you have Jerome Powell, who's been, pontificating for his entire term in office as Fed chairman, well, we can't be political. We have to be divorced from politics. And then he makes what I think looks like an overtly political decision. By the way, I want to add one more thing to what you were saying, Judy, and get your reaction to this. As you know, I'm hyper obsessed with the commodity index because I look at it every morning. You can do this, folks. Go type in CRB index, go to Trading Economics. They will tell you what's happening every minute, by the minute, what's happening to commodity prices. And did you know, Judy, since that Fed rate cut, commodity prices are up 11%. That's a lot.
That's a very important indicator. And now you're talking about the real economy.
Yes.
I'll tell you, an indicator I look at is how fast the gold bars fly off the shelves at Costco. Because I think
right.
that for a lot of people, that is their link to reality. And they have lost a lot of faith in the comments from experts, including monetary officials at the Federal Reserve. And they're starting to say, I want to diversify my wealth. I want safe, tangible assets. And I think a lot of damage has been done to the monetary integrity of U.S. currency.
So the other thing I wanted to add and get your reaction to this is there is an attitude in Washington and in academia that the Fed is like the Pope, that they're infallible, and I think that's such a joke because they've made so many mistakes over the years. And but there was almost an indignant reaction to when you and I were both nominated to be on the Federal Reserve because we didn't drink their Kool-Aid. And you're so right that there's this. They always talk about diversity, right? But they don't want diversity of opinion on the Federal Reserve Board. And so I think that it's really important that people understand that the Fed is not infallible. I think Jerome Powell has made some major mistakes as chairman. I mean, he's the one who almost, you may recall, I think it was at the end of 2017 or 18, he was so tight, he almost thrust the economy into a recession. I remember being with Donald Trump and he was so angry about it. And finally, he decided to lower rates and the economy rebounded. Remember that. And then, of course, he was the one who let the inflation rate go to 9.2%.
Well, that's just it. And the Fed does come across, I think, as rather sanctimonious when it invokes its dual mandate as sort of a sacred duty. It's just that the Fed will say price stability is a responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell has intoned that very often. But there's no accountability. When they hit 9% inflation, nobody got fired for that.
Right.
And even the way they define the mandate says that the Fed is supposed to deliver stable prices. They have reinterpreted that to mean stable inflation, which is an oxymoron. And so I think that a lot of the way that the Fed tries to sanctify its mission is really hiding the fact that you do have just individuals who are very much fallible, and we expect them to be omniscient, and they simply can't be, and they're using old data and then trying to project into the future. It would be much better if there were a basic strategy and a coherent framework that believed that people working productively is a good thing, not necessarily inflationary, but would take a stance on the fiscal overspending. That is a big part of the inflation dilemma.
And, Jerome Powell has not, unlike one of the things I always respected about Alan Greenspan, when a former Fed chairman, and I think a very good one, is, when he would talk to Congress, he would admonish them. And same thing with Paul Volcker. Get your fiscal house in order. He would use the Fed chairmanship as a bully pulpit to tell Congress, look, we can't have a stable money if you're running these enormous deficits. But Jerome Powell never talks about fiscal policy. When he's in front of Congress, he almost never says, hey, you're running these massive deficits. That's making it very difficult to keep inflation under control.
He will say, we take fiscal policy as given, which I do think is a cop-out, and certainly doesn't compare to Paul Volcker saying what's necessary to have sound money. And so I think that he is not willing to tackle the real issue. And he always will say, he'll say this in his testimony to Congress, well, we're on the record as saying in the long run, we're on an unsustainable fiscal path. But I want to say, when does the long run start? Is it next week?
I think it's here right now.
We're there. We are there.
So Judy Shelton is a national treasure. She is the author of the new book, Good as Gold. She has the right prescription for how to stabilize the value of the dollar. As your friend and my friend, Arthur Laffer, likes to say, stable money is one of the 4 pillars of prosperity. And one last thing on the way out, Judy. And by the way, Judy is a senior fellow at the Independence Institute. But I proposed in our hotline this week that if the Nobel Prize Committee had any gumption and any common sense, that they would award the next Nobel Prize in economics to Arthur B. Laffer. What do you think?
100% agree with you. He has shown, and you have documented, that when you lower taxes, you end up increasing growth and you get higher revenues. We had 11% higher revenues, still reflecting the benefit of the cut in taxes and reducing the regulatory burden that you engineered with President Trump. And it brought in excellent revenues. It's just that government outpaces it with even more spending. But Art was exactly right. He's been proven correct. And I think that the supply side formula, which, as you say, includes stable money, is still the agenda that will work for America and for the world to bring prosperity. And he should be acknowledged for that massive contribution to economic theory.
Absolutely. If they can give the Nobel Prize to somebody like Paul Krugman, who's been consistently wrong throughout his whole life, maybe they could give it to somebody who's been right his whole life. Judy, you are a superstar.
Well,
I appreciate
Medal
so
of
much.
Freedom, so yeah.
Oh, he did. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay,
it's
folks.
delightful to be with you, and thank you.
Thank you. That's Judy Shelton. Her new book is As Good as Gold. Get it, folks, and also get my new book with Arthur Laffer called The Trump Economic Miracle. We will be right back. Oh, Judy, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're so nice. Sorry to step over your talking at the end there. I was thinking, and you should be sharing in that Nobel Prize. You should, because I don't even.
Don't you know?
Right
I don't
now.
even have an economic. I have a master's, but I don't even have a PhD in economics. But it is a serious point. I mean, there's no one else even close that has had the impact on our thinking about economics. I mean, he advised Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, many leaders throughout the world. He's advised Donald Trump, and it just shows how do you not give it to him? I mean, it just makes me angry.
I love when I saw that you suggested that. Gil brought it up to me. He says, "Did you see this?" I went, "Oh, he's so right. That's so gracious of you too." But I'll just tell you quickly. Today I met for 2 hours. We're still in Paris. I just had a private meeting there's a guy, Jacques de la Rosière. He's 94. He was the head of France's central bank. He was the head of the International Monetary Fund. He was the head of that European bank in London where I worked. And when we discussed my idea, the book, he's reading my book, he said he wants to do it. He wants France to do the same thing as I'm
that's
suggesting.
fantastic news.
But here's what he said to me. He goes, "But you need a team. We have to do this right." And he said, here's who we should be talking with, Art Laffer. That's who he said, this Frenchman, Art Laffer. I said,
funny.
He gave the first blurb for the book.
That's fantastic.
Yes,
thank you for doing the show. I look forward to seeing you. I haven't seen you in a while, so I hope you next time you get to DC, let me know. I'd love to host a little dinner with you.
I love it. We'll do it.
Okay.
And I'm loving your book. I'm loving it. Congrats.
Thanks, Judy. Take care. Bye.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I want to get back to this issue that we were talking a little bit earlier about with respect to Arthur B. Laffer, who I believe is the most influential economist in the country today. He has had an amazing impact in terms of bringing lower taxes, sound money, free trade, less government, less regulation. He was the architect of Reaganomics. He was very instrumental in the policies of Margaret Thatcher in Europe and England. He was very close to the great Jack Kemp, and Jack Kemp, of course, was the author of the Kemp-Roth tax bill that really saved the American economy back in the early 1980s. Since then, he's worked with dozens of governors to bring their tax rates down so they have more efficient economies. He is obviously the inventor of the Laffer curve, which is a very simple concept, by the way, that as you bring tax rates down, you're going to have more economic activity because a tax reduces your incentive to invest, to save, to work, to create a business. And in other words, if you have a 90% tax rate, you have a 90% incentive not to make more money. Whereas if you have a 10% tax rate, you have a 90% incentive to work more and to save more and invest more. And economics is really about incentives. And this is not that controversial. I mean, the point of the Laffer curve is at some point you get taxes so high that they are actually costing more than they're bringing in. In other words, if you had a 99% tax rate, you're not going to collect much tax revenue, right? You're going to get 99% of very little. If you have a 100% tax rate, nobody's going to work, right? Nobody's going to make any money. No, people don't work to pay taxes. They work to have after-tax income, unless you just doing it charitably. And in that case, you're not going to get any revenues. So this is a theory. This is a theory that has been shown to be true in practice. And we saw this after the Reagan tax cuts. Reagan cut the highest income tax rate from 70% to 28%. That's a gigantic reduction, huge reduction in the tax rate in the United States on income. And what happened after that when we cut the top rate from 70% to 28%? The United States government got more revenues from rich people. Because you know why? They invested more here. They stopped sending their money overseas. All of a sudden, the United States became a haven for business and for income and for factories. And it worked. It worked like spades. So we got huge flows of revenues coming in. And then, of course, by the way, this also worked for John F. Kennedy, a Democrat in the early 1960s, who called for a 30% across-the-board tax rate reduction. And that was John F. Kennedy, a Democrat. And he said that if we do this, we'll get more initiative, we will get more revenues, we will get more businesses. And he was right. We had the boom of the mid-1960s after posthumously his tax cut was enacted into law under LBJ. And then, of course, we had the Trump tax cut. And the Trump tax cut, I'm so sick and tired of these people saying, this is a big tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. We rebuilt the American economy from what had happened under Barack Obama, where we had 8 years of stagnation. And the last year or two under Bush wasn't very good either. And we had a boom in the economy, and the revenues flowed into the Treasury. And they continued to do so. And by the way, I would say if it had not been for the fact that we did the Trump tax cut, the Biden administration would have completely capsized the economy. The only thing that's kept the economy going has been the fact that those low tax rates were put into effect. And in every case, three things have happened when we've cut tax rates. Number one, the economy booms. Number two, we get more jobs and more economic activity that comes to the United States. And number three, it turns out the rich actually oftentimes pay more taxes because they don't shelter their income from the federal government by investing in, all sorts of tax shelters. And so that is the wisdom of the Laffer curve. It is something that many of the Eastern European countries did when the Berlin Wall came down. It caused countries like Estonia and countries like Poland cut their tax rates and their economies really recovered. So you can say this is voodoo economics, but if something works, it's not voodoo. All right. And Arthur B. Laffer is the one who came up with this concept. He's been the Pied Piper for good economic policy, and he ought to receive the the next Nobel Prize in economics. If the people in Sweden have any common sense, he's the one that should get it. I can't think of any economist in the world who deserves it more than he does. And by the way, Paul Krugman has won you may know him. He writes for the New York Times. He's almost always wrong, and yet he's won a Nobel Prize. Paul Krugman, who's almost always wrong, has a Nobel Prize in economics, and Arthur Laffer, who's almost always been right, doesn't have one. There's something wrong with that. And by the way, Arthur Laffer was the best man at my wedding, along with Larry Kudlow, so I'm a little biased here. I am also a co-author of the book, The Trump Economic Miracle, with the great Arthur B. Laffer, and I have learned my economics from the knee of Laffer. He is someone they will be talking about 200, 300 years from now. Now we're going to hear from two financial experts about what's happening with the stock market, how to invest, because the title of this show is The More Money Show, by which we mean we want you to make more money. And one way of doing that is to listen to the advice of Bob and Ryan Payne.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I want to get back to this issue that we were talking a little bit earlier about with respect to Arthur B. Laffer, who I believe is the most influential economist in the country today. He has had an amazing impact in terms of bringing lower taxes, sound money, free trade, less government, less regulation. He was the architect of Reaganomics. He was very instrumental in the policies of Margaret Thatcher in Europe and England. He was very close to the great Jack Kemp, and Jack Kemp, of course, was the author of the Kemp-Roth tax bill that really saved the American economy back in the early 1980s. Since then, he's worked with dozens of governors to bring their tax rates down so they have more efficient economies. He is obviously the inventor of the Laffer curve, which is a very simple concept, by the way, that as you bring tax rates down, you're going to have more economic activity, because a tax reduces your incentive to invest, to save, to work, to create a business. And in other words, if you have a 90% tax rate, you have a 90% incentive not to make more money. Whereas if you have a 10% tax rate, you have a 90% incentive to work more and to save more and invest more. And economics is really about incentives. And this is not that controversial. I mean, the point of the Laffer curve is at some point you get taxes so high that they are actually costing more than they're bringing in. In other words, if you had a 99% tax rate, you're not going to collect much tax revenue, right? You're going to get 99% of very little. If you have a 100% tax rate, nobody's going to work, right? Nobody's going to make any money. No, people don't work to pay taxes. They work to have after-tax income, unless you just doing it charitably. And in that case, you're not going to get any revenues. So this is a theory. This is a theory that has been shown to be true in practice. And we saw this after the Reagan tax cuts. Reagan cut the highest income tax rate from 70% to 28%. That's a gigantic reduction, huge reduction in the tax rate in the United States on income. And what happened after that? When we cut the top rate from 70% to 28%, the United States government got more revenues from rich people. Because you know why? They invested more here. They stopped sending their money overseas. All of a sudden, the United States became a haven for business and for income and for factories. And it worked. It worked like spades. So we got huge flows of revenues coming in. And then, of course, by the way, this also worked for John F. Kennedy, a Democrat in the early 1960s, who called for a 30% across-the-board tax rate reduction. And that was John F. Kennedy, a Democrat. And he said that if we do this, we'll get more initiative, we will get more revenues, we will get more businesses. And he was right. We had the boom of the mid-1960s after posthumously his tax cut was enacted into law under LBJ. And then, of course, we had the Trump tax cut. And the Trump tax cut, I'm so sick and tired of these people saying, there's a big tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. We rebuilt the American economy from what had happened under Barack Obama, where we had 8 years of stagnation, and the last year or two under Bush wasn't very good either. And we had a boom in the economy, and the revenues flowed into the Treasury. And they continued to do so. And by the way, I would say if it had not been for the fact that we did the Trump tax cut, the Biden administration would have completely capsized the economy. The only thing that's kept the economy going has been the fact that those low tax rates were put into effect. And in every case, three things have happened when we've cut tax rates. Number one, the economy booms. Number two, we get more jobs and more economic activity that comes to the United States. And number three, it turns out the rich actually oftentimes pay more taxes because they don't shelter their income from the federal government by investing in, all sorts of tax shelters. And so that is the wisdom of the Laffer curve. It is something that many of the Eastern European countries did when the Berlin Wall came down. It caused countries like Estonia and countries like Poland cut their tax rates and their economies really recovered. So you can say this is voodoo economics, but if something works, it's not voodoo. All right. And Arthur B. Laffer is the one who came up with this concept. He's been the Pied Piper for good economic policy, and he ought to receive the next Nobel Prize in economics. If the people in Sweden have any common sense, he's the one that should get it. I can't think of any economist in the world who deserves it more than he does. And by the way, Paul Krugman has won you may know him. He writes for the New York Times. He's almost always wrong, and yet he's won a Nobel Prize. Paul Krugman, who's almost always wrong, has a Nobel Prize in economics, and Arthur Laffer, who's almost always been right, doesn't have one. There's something wrong with that. And by the way, Arthur Laffer was the best man at my wedding, along with Larry Kudlow, so I'm a little biased here. I am also a co-author of the book, The Trump Economic Miracle, with the great Arthur B. Laffer. And I have learned my economics from the knee of Laffer. He is someone they will be talking about 200, 300 years from now. Now we're going to hear from two financial experts about what's happening with the stock market, how to invest, because the title of this show is The More Money Show, by which we mean we want you to make more money. And one way of doing that is to listen to the advice of Bob and Ryan Payne.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I've always said I'm not a very good talk radio show host, but I get the best guests in the country, and boy, do we have them today. We're actually up in New York today at the Yacht Club for a big dinner to celebrate a great new book called The Trump Economic Miracle, written by the great Arthur Laffer and myself. So Arthur Laffer is joining us. We also have the great Steve Forbes, who is the chairman of Forbes Media, former presidential candidate who should have been president because he had all the right ideas. And I'm especially privileged to be next to Bob Nardelli, who is one of the great titans of business in the last 50 years at Home Depot and GE, and I can't even keep track, Bob. Chrysler, amazing man. So I want to start with you, if I could, Bob Nardelli, and talking a little bit about the two presidential candidates who have really almost diametrically opposite views of the economy and business. And Arthur and I talk a lot in the book about, the importance of keeping our business tax rates low. Kamala Harris doesn't believe that. She wants to raise them up again, and the capital gains tax. And from the front line of the business world, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come in. I've lived through 7 recessions, Steve. I've been at this for 53 years.
That's almost as many as Arthur has.
77.
Yeah, wow. So, there couldn't be anything more detrimental to reshoring and onshoring. And the difference is onshoring brings it back to the U.S., reshoring, in my interpretation, gets it out of China and maybe brings it to another country, Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. So I never had a direct outsourcing strategy. But when I had to compete globally at General Electric, GE Power Systems, I was competing with Siemens, ABB, and other companies around the world that had a much more advantaged tax rate. So for me to compete, I had to go offshore to be able to compete on a price basis.
You mean because of the high taxes?
Because of the high taxes,
Right.
because of high taxes and regulation.
So you're telling out the
regulation.
laugher that taxes actually do affect behavior?
Art, God bless you, man.
You got it right, huh?
Yeah, he got it right.
So we cut the rate from 35% to 21%. That was the Laffer-Forbes Kudlow-Moore plan. And we brought a lot of capital back to the United States. Remember, we had a bunch of inversions. Those stopped. An inversion was when an American company would, what's the term you use, offshore?
There was offshoring,
Yeah.
right? And then we've been talking a lot about onshoring, which was trying to bring them back to the U.S., and then reshoring, which is a derivative of that, means out of China, but into maybe a lower cost country like Vietnam or Philippines or somewhere. Yeah.
And so it appears that the corporate tax cut that Trump put into place was a big boom.
It was a boom. I tell you, the business community couldn't have been more supportive and more excited about keeping production here, having factories here, having workers here, and really driving productivity.
So before I get to Arthur's, Steve Forbes, one other quick question, if I may. So Kamala Harris's line is, corporate profits are high, but wages are not high, and therefore we want to, I'm kind of summarizing the way she says, we could take some of those corporate profits away from by price gouging laws and so on, and we can give that to the workers. And to a lot of people, that says, hey, that sounds a pretty good deal. What would be the repercussion of that?
Well, a couple of things. The terminology is corporate America. So we're talking about Americans that are the employees. When I was at Home Depot, I had 350,000 associates
Wow.
that we had to make sure, that we had a fair wage. Now, in today's environment, because of this administration, how do you have a fair wage? It's like a pig in a python. It's moving through there, right? Remember, inflation was transitory. Remember that comment from the administration? Well, as inflation goes up 9.1%, I had predicted 10. I remember we had this discussion on Fox. And so it's hard to keep up with fair family wages, right? With that. I haven't seen, I deal with Fortune 50, lower middle market. I haven't seen one inflationary price increase roll down as a result of what's happened. So, precious metals, we do a lot of aerospace, so Inconel, titanium, et cetera, up 35, 40%. The only commodity I've seen come down is lumber, when they use that as an example. It has nothing to do with the inflation, with what this administration did. Lumber came down because the price of building a new home, the mortgage rates were so high, people weren't building, people weren't selling to trade up. That was something that took place for a while under the Trump administration, trade in, trade up. So lumber came down, but given what happened now, the catastrophic hurricane, we're going to see lumber prices go up. We're seeing oil prices, at $70 a barrel now or something.
So the bottom line is our corporation's price gouging.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. When she talked about fixing prices at the end of the supply chain, that's catastrophic. If you want to really do that, you got to go all the way back to the chemicals that are creating, the feedstock and the transportation to get it to the chicken farm, and then the chicken farm to the processor. So you just can't fix the price back here. You know what's going to happen, right? We've seen it before, Art and Steve, right? We see what happens is supply goes down, prices go up. It's history repeats itself. We know what happened. Now, if you use, the thing Trump's talking about, tariffs, I just want to comment on that. If it's a policy, probably not good. If it's a tactic, like he uses it so well, it's with laser focus. He's doing it extremely well.
So that's Bob Nardelli, who was the chairman of Chrysler,
Home Depot.
and Home Depot, and many other companies. One of the great businessmen in America.
And could have saved GE.
GE too. You
should have saved GE.
Well,
Did save GE. So
you,
honored to be with you at this.
You got Steve Forbes.
So Steve Forbes, comment on what Bob was talking about. We're talking. The Trump plan is he announced this week he wants to bring the rate down to 15% for businesses. That's, I think, maybe even lower than where you were in your famous flat tax. I think you were at 17%. But the tax rates matter a lot, and Kamala doesn't seem to understand that.
No, taxes, as you've discussed many, many times, are a price. The price you pay for working, price for taking risks that work out, price for success. And when you penalize good things like productive work, risk-taking success, you're going to get less of them. She's destroying capital. Mm-hmm. And Bob's point about regulation, for some reason, about 25, 30 years ago, the U.S. decided to regulate manufacturing like they were villains. And today, the Competitive Enterprise Institute finds that a manufacturer with 50 or fewer employees, regulations cost $50,000 per employee.
Jeez.
Versus $5,000 tax. Bigger companies, $26,000, $27,000.
So they're like a regressive tax.
So it's a regressive tax. So why do we have trouble in manufacturing? We're just grinding them out of business.
So Arthur Laffer, Jeff Yassa and I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal this week where we were arguing that if you have essentially what she wants, a 35% capital gains tax and a 31 or 32% corporate rate, and those are basically taxing the same income, right? Mm-hmm. So that would basically, our argument is we're essentially making the government a 50% shareholder in every company because they get 50% of the profits. So is that a good thing?
Well, let me just say, the way I read the capital gains tax and the unearned, the unrealized capital gains, it's a continuous tax. Yeah. It's like a property tax. It's not like you tax it once and then it's yours. Uh-huh. No, it's like a property tax. You tax it once and then you tax it again next year and again and again and again. Right. So when you look at it, it's nothing like any other tax. This is a wealth tax. Mm-hmm. And if you want to just see it, let's say you got a $600,000 gain there, and let's imagine interest rates are about 8% or something like that, and let's imagine you put a 1% tax on that capital gain. Yes. That will reduce the value of that asset from $600,000 to $525,000. That's just with a 1% tax.
Well, but she wants to raise it by
I understand. So what you're doing is you're going to really crash the whole wealth base. Right. And the thing, if you look at wealth taxes, and let's say 15% in central Detroit right now, there are property tax rates that are about 20%, the very highest. No, and the properties are worth.
You pay that every year.
Yeah, and the properties are worth $10,000 or something like that. What you find is the greatest, most prosperous places in the nation are those with very low property taxes. The reason California survives and is because of that blowhole of Proposition 13. They are the single best property tax state in the nation, and it offsets all the damage done by the others. Now, not makes them great, but without Proposition 13, California would be West Virginia.
So, Bob Nardelli, you worked at, you ran Home Depot, and
I thought you were going to go all through them again, Steve.
This relative to what these hurricanes.
Yes.
And Home Depot is absolutely essential to getting the supplies. You mentioned lumber and all of the products that people need to stay essentially alive. When you were running Home Depot, how do you deal with a crisis like that?
That's a great question, because I couldn't be more proud of those associates. We had a slogan where we tend to shine our brightest when people are facing their darkest hours. I was with Warren Buffett on 9/11. We were going through, we were walking stores. He was a supplier to Home Depot.
Amazing.
And
where were you? What town were you in?
In Omaha. In Omaha.
Okay, wow.
And so when that crisis took place, rented a car and drove straight through to Atlanta. We have a crisis center that.
Wait, you drove from Omaha to Atlanta?
Straight through.
Yeah, because all the
planes were canceled.
Right. No flights.
So we have put in place that team, a command center that the government comes and looks at. We watch all the TV. So when we saw the rescuers' shoes were melting, we go next door to the media room, to the merchandising room, order 500 pairs. We go to logistics, get them there. When the Pentagon, the roof caved in, we started in California with shoring timbers and released them. Wow. We were the first ones at 9/11 working with Mayor Rudy. We couldn't have had a better relationship. everything from pencils and paper to you name it. We rebuilt the roof at the Pentagon. We did the memorial behind the Pentagon.
Amazing.
And so those associates really loved giving back and helping. Hurricane Katrina, same thing.
Right.
We put up circus tents and went to remote registers and brought stuff out so we can get people back into their homes as quickly as we could, Steve.
So, Steve Forbes, maybe we should just close down FEMA and just contract it out to companies like Home Depot.
Bring it on.
Because you look at the catastrophic response to these hurricanes we've seen from the Biden.
Yeah, disaster is not a 9-to-5 job. It's not one that has to be ruled by rules. You have to do a lot of improvisation. And so you see a situation, okay, what works in that situation? You don't look to a rule book. And that's why they should farm it out to people who can do it in advance, but you can get stuff there.
Yeah, but there's one problem with that. How would you take care of illegal aliens? Just joking. Sorry, guys.
So, by the way,
that's a government job.
Yeah. Well, that's what Home Depot, that's what FEMA does.
I'm sitting here, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC, and I'm sitting here with Steve Forbes and Bob Nardelli and Arthur Laffer, three of my heroes. So thank you again, guys, for joining. I want to kind of end this and ask you each. By the way, Arthur Laffer and I are authors of the new book, The Trump Economic Miracle. So go to TrumpEconomicMiracle.com and you can get that free. But what is the one thing that you would do to improve the economy if you were the top advisor to whoever the next president? What is the most urgent thing we do? And Steve Forbes, I will start with you.
First thing you do is allow energy to be exploited again, mined again, drilled again in the United States. That tells the world we're back in business. And then you start deregulating. Unglamorous, but by golly, people say relief is on the way, and they'll start to invest in anticipation. Throw in a tax bill as well, and we're on our way.
And we're on our way. Bob Nardelli, I'm going to ask you the same question. And just generally also, how do you feel like business conditions are right now, and what do we need to do to get American companies to be even more profitable and hire more workers?
I want to piggyback on Steve because I ran GE Power Systems. And let me say that, energy is fundamental to everything we do. You're trying to get rid of fossil fuels. You got 296 million fossil fuel cars on the road, 12.6 years the average life. They're not going away soon, right? So energy, Steve, I couldn't agree more. And why did we stop shipping LNG? It could have been the biggest geopolitical thing to help Germany versus buying from Russia, right? So that's number one. I totally agree. We've got to get the regulations down. When they talk about they've issued these permits, again, it's a false negative. It's a false. I mean, they may have, but it's between the lip and the cup, Steve, right? To really get the drilling in place. They stopped a lot of this drilling for obvious reasons from the green movement, which has really negatively impacted us. You look at some of the data centers. Now they're opening a nuclear plant to be able to provide energy to run a data center for AI, right? So I think that's really important. And again, reinforcing, we got to get labor back here in the United States. It's the strength. It's the bones of this country.
I'm going to turn to you for this question. But one last question for you, Bob. The quality of the American workers, do we have a problem there? Do you think American workers are ready for the jobs of the next 20 years?
Yeah, I think there's no question there's going to be a retraining process that has to come. I think AI will have a tremendous, profound impact because large corporations who can afford to implement it are taking that redundant work out, Steve, unfortunately. So we're going to have to do a lot of training to get those people back gainfully employed again.
So, Arthur, you're obviously the godfather of the flat tax, so you'll probably say that's one of the most important. But there's so much that needs to be done after 4 years of Biden. What should be the top concern for?
After listening to these two, I'm just going to say ditto.
Yeah.
I just agree with what you guys are doing, and it's so correct. And rather than trying to think of something new to say, what you guys have said really hits
Well, could you add anything to what they said?
I could, but come on. If I added, I mean, on the margins.
Tell them about one. We got 2 minutes left. Healthcare transparency. Why is that so important? Because you were the one who convinced Trump to do that.
Yeah, well, there's 20% of our GDP, of our total output, where you don't know what the price of the product is. You don't know what the quality is. Your doctor doesn't have a clue either. You have no idea. The prices are all over the place, even in the same hospital for different insurance policies, let alone across hospitals, et cetera. It's outrageous. We need to make sure all healthcare providers post the transactions price, the price they're willing to buy and sell the price for, and what the what the benefits are of this with just transparency. And let people choose.
And Trump wants to do that. Right?
Well, I think Trump really wants to do this, and Trump understands it because he understands what it's like buying and selling raw materials, et cetera. I mean, our GE that you and I love so much, Trump was one of the major suppliers. I asked Jack Welch about Trump in 2016, and Jack said, I'm not going to talk about.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I want to put in a quick plug, if I may, since it is my show. Please, please, please go to Amazon and get my new book, which is I co-wrote with the great Arthur Laffer, called The Trump Economic Miracle. Because you'll learn a lot about the economy. I think it's only like $14.95. It's not very expensive. And also, by the way, do me a favor, folks, if you would, do the rating. You know how they have these ratings for the books. What's happened is all these left wingers who've never even read the book, never even bought it, they're putting in these negative reviews. So I'm only getting 3 stars out of 5. That's because the left has a campaign. This is how they operate. They have all these little minions who go out there and, this is a terrible book, horrible book, because they hate Trump. So it'd be good if our people went out and said, no, this is a great book. And, it is a great book. It has a lot of great information about why Trump was so successful as president when he was president, and why he will do the same thing when he is reelected. And also, folks, go to unleashprosperity.com and get our hotline that comes out every morning. It is the latest news on economy, politics. It is free, absolutely free. I just want you to get it because I want you to be the smartest person in the room. And most of you already are, but this will help you retain that status. Okay, now I am going to turn to someone who is back by popular demand. I had him on about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and people keep coming up to me telling me, I want to hear more from Ned Mamula. Ned Mamula is one of the smartest geologists in the country. He was one of the chief geologists for the federal government at the U.S. Geological Survey. He has worked with me over the years on a bunch of issues related to America's mineral wealth. And he has a new book called Undermining Power. And that's kind of a pun, Undermining Power. Ned, thanks for coming back on the show.
Steve Moore, it's always a pleasure and an honor to be with you, and I thank you for working with me over the years. You're not afraid to lateral into a new field. You're an economist, but you got into mining with me.
Well, because it is an economic issue, Ned. And by the way, I wasn't lying when I say people loved what you had to say the last time you were on. And so I wanted to expand on that conversation we had because it was so eye-opening for people. And let's start from the beginning for the people who may have missed that interview we did a month or two ago. Sure. Tell us about the value of America's mineral wealth.
Okay, Steve, our country is so blessed with resources. Some of them you can see, like soil, the timber, the water, the beautiful water. But what you can't see underground is the oil that we're blessed with, the gas, natural gas. You hear President Trump talking about the minerals. You can't see them. But when you look at a geologic map, Steve, it's almost, for me, it's like a spiritual experience because we have more minerals and metals than any other country in the world. We can talk about the reason why. I know the reason why, in my heart of hearts. But here's the point. We have
Hold on.
Minerals.
We believe you, Ned. We will take your word for it that we have a lot of the minerals, but we're not going after them. That's what's so discouraging.
Well, it's a great irony. We're a country of abundance, yet we're the number one importer of minerals and metals in the world.
Oh, hold on. Time out, Ned. Because what you just said is so darn important. Say that again. I want you to repeat what you just said.
Here it is. America is the most abundant mineral resource country probably in the world. And ironically, we're also the number one importer of critical minerals from other countries in the world.
That is such an amazing thing, Ned. I mean, I would have you on the show just to tell our people, our folks that. I mean, think about what Ned just said, folks. We're sitting underneath a treasure chest, a multi-trillion-dollar treasure chest, and these lunatics will not let us get at it. Now, Ned, I want to keep this very simple for our audience. I mean, you're a PhD geologist. You know 100 times more about this than I do. Now, what people might be skeptical when they hear you say that, because they're going to say, we're going to pollute the environment, we're going to destroy our national parks, we're going to turn them into like old coal mines and, when they used to do the stripping and so on. Is that true?
That is so untrue. In fact, let me tell you my thinking on this now after, working on this for years and years. Steve, technology, AI, all the technology, it has swept through every field, including mining. People can go in and mine metals out of the ground and make the environment beautiful when they're done. Okay, so to say that we can't have a clean environment and mining at the same time, not only is it untrue, I'm calling it an out-and-out lie, because to say that is disinformation, and that was part of the topic of my new book, Undermining Power. I'm telling people, look, don't believe that we can't have both. This is the United States. We can do things other countries cannot do, and we have been doing them, for a number of years now. People just don't know about it.
And so, what kind of minerals? Well, first of all, Ned, I think that you've told me that most of these minerals are out in the mountains of the western states: Colorado, Montana, the Dakotas, Montana. Is that true?
Yeah. See, look, minerals are in all 50 states, including construction materials, sand, gravel, stone, all that, and all the. But most of your metallic minerals, your copper, your zinc, your tin, your gold, your silver, those metals are in minerals that are located in the Rocky Mountain belt. Okay. In that belt of the Rocky Mountains extending from Alaska all the way down to Mexico and beyond. So that's our real treasure chest there. But we have minerals of value in almost all of the 50 states, believe it or not. But that's really the ground zero for mining and minerals. And
that's where a lot of
most of it on federal land.
Yeah, and traditionally that's where we had everybody knows the 49ers, the gold rush in California, and these mountainous states have a lot of resources, but people are worried. They see the beautiful picture. The mountains of Montana, the most gorgeous thing. One of the most beautiful views on earth. And people are worried that I've heard people say they want to drill in our national parks and they want to despoil our environment. And I just get that every single time we talk about this, Ned.
Yeah, people, look, Steve, this isn't even realistic. Look, no one's talking about drilling on federal national parks or federal grassland. No. There are so many places in the West that have mineral deposits that can be safely and environmentally friendly mined, and you would never know it. Places that you would never see unless you're looking at a satellite image of our country.
Right.
So that's that's another lie.
Hold on, Ned? Again, apologies to cut you off, but it's we don't have a lot of time, and you're just rich with information. You're as rich with information as our grounds are with resources. So why did they lie?
Well, look, the brass ring of the environmental movement is to stop mining. They want to stop mining, Steve. And by the way, there's a corollary to that. A decision has already been made by our politicians in Washington to import everything we need. They're saying, hey, let other countries tear up their land. We'll just import what we need from them and keep our land pristine. This is a very, very bad philosophy.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous.
It's not a good philosophy. It's just hurtful all the way around.
And again, I don't understand. It's almost unpatriotic, in my opinion, not to be using these resources. It's jobs, it's money, and I think you have. I don't want to misquote you, so if I've got this wrong, please correct me. But I think you've said that we could get about $1 trillion of federal money over the years if we just because of the royalties and the other taxes that we could impose on the companies that would get at this stuff, whether it's copper, or whether it's uranium, or whether it's the precious metals. So it's almost like free money.
Yeah, $1 trillion is way too low, Steve. Okay,
way too low.
The National Mining Association has said there are many, many trillions of dollars of metals in our federal lands and in our country, but gaining access to them is the trick. And here's the point. I want to leave this with your audience. Yeah. We're importing way too much, but here's the point. We're importing 70% of the critical minerals from our adversaries, China and Russia. Yeah. Jeez. This is why mineral security is national security, because we're importing metals we need from our friends in China. Probably not a good idea.
So, folks, you can see that Ned is nailing it here. And this just makes so much common sense, what you're saying, that you almost have to be, someone who is intentionally trying to, as your book title is, undermining power. It is undermining our economic power, our national security. And so you said, what countries? You said China and Russia, some of these other, where else do we get these minerals from?
Well, we import from China, Russia. We import from Indonesia. We import from some other bad guy countries, and it's not a good strategy because any one of them can embargo or trade restrict. Yeah, China has already trade restricted 5 of the critical minerals in the last 18 months.
This is stupendously stupid, what we're doing, folks. That's why I wanted to have Ned on. And so these critical minerals that we're talking about, and one of the ironies you and I have talked about, because I followed Ned Mamula. By the way, I'm talking to Ned Mamula, who is the author of Undermining Power, and is one of the top geologists in the country. He knows more about this stuff than just about anybody else you could possibly talk to. But one of the ironies that you've mentioned is that if we want green energy, that requires, solar panels, wind turbines, electric batteries. They require these precious metals. And if we can't get them in the United States, then we're surrendering our power over to these other countries that hate us.
That's right. Most every solar panel coming into the used in the United States is coming in from China. I mean, this is the problem. Yeah, right. This is the problem. So I love clean energy. I love green energy. I love solar. I love wind. But you got to have all of the above strategy. And to have that, and to have our beautiful grid, GRID, our electric grid in the United States, that grid is dependent on 6-7 critical minerals, and China's already embargoed some of those. So we have a problem. They know exactly what they're doing to us. They know our laws, rules, and regulations about minerals better than we do. So. And
you have worked closely with the Trump people. I know this firsthand, that you have briefed I don't know if you briefed the president personally, but you've briefed a lot of smart people who are advising him. Do you think that if Trump is elected, he will make this a priority, that we actually drill and mine for our own resources?
Yes, Steve. When you hear the president out on the stump say, drill, baby, drill, you got to think in your head, mine, baby, mine. We also have,
right.
When he says drill, think mine. And also, your audience needs to know, the United States of America, we're the only G20 country in the world, without a Bureau of Mines. We had a Bureau of Mines that was closed in the mid-'90s. They said, we don't need that.
We don't need that, yeah.
Yeah, and from that day to this day, our mining output has been on the decline. Now, come on, our politicians make decisions about our resources. They know not what they're doing. Okay, they're not qualified to make these decisions.
Well, I think it's either that or there's a sinister element to this. It's almost like these are flat Earth policy people, and they don't want us. It's almost like they don't want our economy to grow and thrive.
Look, let me explain it simply to the audience again. There's 2 opposing views that a lot of these flat earthers have: conserve and preserve. You conserve your metals and your minerals and your resources. Conservation is good. That means you use and you leave some for the next generation. Right. Preserving means you don't touch them. Therefore, the value of all our mineral resources in the ground is actually zero. See? So you don't want to preserve for posterity, they're not going to use it. You want to conserve, but you want to use, and you want to be self-sufficient. Our founders wanted us to be self-sufficient with our resources and stop importing from monarchical powers back 200 years ago. And the same principle applies today. We should be more self-sufficient in that in which we have.
Well, that's Ned Mamula telling us about the stupidity of the Biden administration policies that are not allowing us to drill and not allowing us to mine for our resources, and therefore we become dependent on China and Russia and other countries like Iran that hate us. It is absolutely the most imbecilic policy I've ever heard of. And fortunately, when Donald Trump gets back into office, I think you're going to be the head of the U.S. Geological Service, Ned, and you're going to turn this policy around, and that will help make America great again. Ned, thanks for joining. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the close of the More Money Show. A wonderful time. I hope you enjoyed our incredible guests. Thank you to Arthur Laffer and Steve Forbes and Bob Nardelli and Shudi Shelton and all the others who I just think they're amazing people. I learned a lot. I hope that you did. We will be live next Saturday. Hopefully, I'll be able to take your questions. And I'm going to work to make sure that the next mayor of New York City is the great John Catsimatidis. We'll be back, same bat time, same bat channel on the More Money Show next Saturday at 1 p.m. Folks, have a great, great weekend.